Hello everybody, I hope the day is finding you well. It is Sunday, November 12th as I sit here recording this, and this isn't a normal ramble rant video. This one was a request over on my Discord server, which is free to join, by the way. I was asked to review and rate the lore of each of the other TCGs, the ones that aren't Magic, presumably. There are a lot of card games on the market these days, and while lore is not a requirement for any of them, plenty of them have it regardless, whether it just be a quick blurb to explain what you're doing, or an overarching story that you can follow across the various sets. Now, Magic, the earliest TCG, obviously has had a story going since nearly the beginning, and while it has its ups and downs, I'm going to be using Magic as a baseline. That is, Magic is going to have a rank of 5 out of 10 total stars. It's not perfect, especially very recently, but there is a lot to it, and it has an expansive world that, if approached with some competence, keyword, competence, can be done exceptionally well. So, with Magic as the baseline, 5 out of 10, let's begin with the next best thing. The Pokemon TCG has been going on for nearly as long as Magic has, and also, funny thing to note, it was also being produced by Wizards of the Coast in the beginning. They quickly lost those rights to Nintendo, and it's been produced by its parent company ever since. Now, while Pokemon does have a overall story, several overall stories depending on which canon you follow, the card game itself doesn't really have a plot. It does have some unique elements, different kinds of characters who are only seen on the cards, some kind of Pokemon unique variants that are only seen on the cards, and I think even a unique region a while back was talked about. But the plot of the Pokemon TCG is effectively non-existent. It's just card representations of the Pokemon world, and for that reason and that reason alone, Pokemon has to receive a 1 out of 10. Now, in regards to the Pokemon TCG video games, those get a solid 8 out of 10. They are really good. The characters in them are quite enjoyable, despite them being Game Boy games. It's very ancient, really, but they're still very enjoyable and fun to play, even today, I think. Now, as for the other major TCG, Yu-Gi-Oh!, the story is a bit different. You see, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has two plots. There is the anime plot, the plot of Yu-Gi-Oh! That we watch, and then there is the lore of the cards. For the anime plot, I'm going to be very simple. I'm very biased towards early Yu-Gi-Oh! I greatly enjoyed the original series, and a bit of GX as well, but that's not really the lore of the card game, so I'm going to completely ignore it for the purposes of this video. Instead, I'm going to judge the lore of the cards based on the lore of the cards, and there's honestly a lot. Most archetypes introduced to the game these days have at least some sort of story based on them. That story is kind of hard to get to since Konami doesn't produce lore books in English. A lot of the lore is available exclusively to the Japanese fanbase, and that is unfortunate. But for those of you who are willing to look, there is a lot. The dual terminal archetypes all have their own story that is followed through each of the dual terminal versions. A lot of the new archetypes introduced to the game have overarching stories that follow them. The Lightsworns, for instance, evolve into the Twilight Sworns, I think they're called now. The Six Samurai have an overarching story. The Blackwings apparently have a story. There's so much to explore, and the Duel Monsters world is vast, and for that, I'm going to go ahead and give Yu-Gi-Oh! A 7 out of 10. There's a lot there, and what I've seen is enjoyable, but unfortunately, it's really, really hard to find a lot of this stuff. It's kind of unfortunate. Konami, like, what are you doing? I'm not entirely sure, but I have this deep-seated suspicion that Konami actually hates money. When you compare what they've done with Metal Gear Solid to how they treat the Western audiences of Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'm just convinced that Konami really just doesn't want our money, but that's neither here nor there. My rating is unchanged. Let's move on. Now, beyond the big three, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Pokemon, there are a slew of other TCGs. Some quite popular, others less so. I would be remiss to not talk about Flesh and Blood in this video, however, and goddamn, do I absolutely adore what we have so far in regards to the lore for this game. Most sets released for Flesh and Blood have at least some story associated with them, and a lot of the characters you see some progression with their individual stories as well as an overarching narrative, although what that narrative is going to be isn't entirely fleshed out yet. For Flesh and Blood, I give an overall rating of 8 out of 10. There's a lot here, plenty of world building, a lot of enjoyable characters, and a clear motion in the plot. But there's a lot that could be done. As I've said before in other videos, there's not a lot of substance to Flesh and Blood's lore yet. A lot of the story entries are really short, really neat, but there's not a lot there, and it feels like the story is moving at kind of a molasses pace. Yes, there have been recently, especially with Dusk Till Dawn, some pretty important events going on in the story, but it still feels like 3 years, 4 years into this game's story, not a lot has happened yet, and I hope that that will change soon. But for now, 8 out of 10, it's very good, currently my favorite. If you've been around for a long enough time, you'll know that the Force of Will TCG has had a story going on ever since the beginning. Now, there have been multiple arcs for this TCG, some good, some bad. I have not read all of it, I've not followed entirely with the lore, but I do know that there are several overall arcing plots, and that one of the main characters is Alice, and that Dark Alice is another main character. I'm going to be honest here, I have not actually read the Force of Will story in about 5 years now, I want to say. Since 2018, 2017, I want to gather. I know that there's been a lot going on in the story, but it's very kind of nebulous. There's a lot of action sequences, a lot of plots going on behind the background. I honestly could not tell you the overall plot of Force of Will, but I do remember when I did read it, it was quite enjoyable with some very laughable moments, but also some really dark ones. One of the main villains, or a major villain I should say, is Valentina, who can kind of body hop. She's terrifying, honestly, the fact that she can just possess other people's bodies in her overall goal to become, I think her evil plan is to become the most loved person in existence by force. It's kind of creepy, but yeah, I don't know the entire overall plot, but from what I've seen, it's been rather enjoyable. 6 out of 10, just because I haven't read enough of it to give a more unbiased judgment. Now, the MetaZoo card game is kind of a meme. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3 out of 10. It does have a story following along the main character. I think his name is Sam, but there's not a whole lot of substance to it, and it's clear that the story, it's a manga actually, is just a little staple add-on to the game, and not the other way around. It's fine, it exists, there's that. I know that all 2 MetaZoo fans are going to kill me for this, but yeah, 3 out of 10, not enjoyable. The Lorcana TCG is going to get the same rating, 3 out of 10. There is a quick blurb so far, giving you a rough introduction to the story. You are a ink caster, or something along those lines, who has been summoned to defend the world from evil, nebulous evil, and you're going to be using the power of Disney tales to defend the good and the righteous and all that jazz. There's really not a lot to it, but also this game has only had 1 set so far, so who knows, maybe in the future we will get more of a lore, but for now, 3 out of 10. Now for card games like Weiss Schwarz, Transformers, Dragon Ball, Digimon, and all that jazz, I'm going to give these all the same rating of 4. None of these TCGs have their own lore. They are all card game adaptations of existing IPs, just depicting characters from famous shows or anime or what have you on the cards just to sell them to you. It's fine, but there's no real story there. Some of them do depict the stories on the cards. The Dragon Ball TCG, for instance, had several cards that were showing clear progression of characters like Goku and Vegeta throughout the sets, and that's pretty neat, but overall, there's no real lore here. It's better than the weird nebulous lore of things like Lorcana, but it's still not great, so yeah, 4 out of 10. That's really all the card games I can judge. There are other TCGs that exist like Mythos or Neopets or Bakugan, but they don't really have lore to them so much as they're just, again, like Weiss Schwarz, depicting other IPs in card games just to sell them to you. They're enjoyable and all that, but they're not really lore heavy. What do you guys think? Was I too harsh in my ratings? Possibly, but I believe it's important to be critical when you're a critic. Am I a critic? I don't think I am. Anywho, let me know what you think. Let me know if you have different opinions on how good or bad the lore of these TCGs are in the comment section below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.